Hey y'all, this is Brown at IF Brown, and as part of my ongoing coverage for Essential X-Men Volume 7, we are going to be talking about issue number 214, and the title is With Malice Toward All, and Chris Claremont was the writer, with Barry Windsor Smith on guest pencils and Bob Wiacek on the inks. So Barry Windsor Smith is a legend of the comic book industry in terms of sheer artistic talent. And when I think of the word illustrator, Barry Windsor Smith is someone that matches that word perfectly. So the stuff that I've seen of his includes the first several issues of Conan the Barbarian, which was the comic book series that Marvel started in the 70s, which initially adapted Robert E. Howard's stories, but then, of course, being a comic book series, went beyond Robert E. Howard's stuff. And then he also did this beautiful black and white adaptation of the Bryn McMorn story, Worms of the Earth. And so if you like Robert E. Howard and you like dark fantasy, definitely check out Bryn McMorn, because both in terms of, say, the short stories and the occasional novella, I mean, we got some great stuff. But as far as the comic book adaptation that Barry Windsor Smith did for that particular story, I mean, it's beautiful and horrifying at once, and that's something that he was really good at doing. I mean, he was able to move you by the amount of beauty that was in his work, but also to put you on edge at the same time, because there was oftentimes an ominous feeling with his work, and when it veered into full-on horror territory, I mean, you got some unforgettable imagery. And so some other stuff that I remember, seeing of his and enjoying was his work on the miniseries, Machine Man 2020. And so Herb Trimpe actually did the pencils for the first 3 issues, and Barry Windsor Smith did the inks. But then come issue 4, the final issue in the miniseries, Barry Windsor Smith, took over on artwork entirely, and we had some awesome, cyberpunk, artwork, and also it was a good cyberpunk story too. But the artwork, though, in that, with respect to Herb Trimpe, because his artwork was good too, but Barry Windsor Smith, doing the entirety of the artwork for the last issue in the miniseries, they saved the best for last. And so, also, he, did the epilogue for the Armor Wars storyline for the Iron Man series. And if you like Iron Man, definitely check out the Armor Wars storyline. It's available in multiple trade paperbacks, and it's gone down as one of the best Iron Man stories ever written. But for the epilogue, though, we have some wonderful sci-fi horror art, which basically stems from Tony Stark having a terrifying nightmare stemming from the events in the Armor Wars. And I mean, seriously, like it's a hybrid of science fiction and horror, just in terms of sheer imagery, but also in terms of the psychological toll that the events had took on Tony Stark, and we were seeing just how it's getting to him. And Barry Windsor Smith's work was just chef's kiss. Some other stuff that I saw of his, or some of the artwork that I'm really fond of, was for Solar, Man of the Atom, which Jim Shooter wrote the initial first few issues, or first several issues, and Barry Windsor Smith did the pencils. And so it was something that it was a good introduction to the Valiant universe in general, I think. I mean, next to Magnus Robot Fighter, but Solar Man of the Atom is basically where it all started, if I remember correctly. So it's a really good science fiction story with a little bit of fantasy thrown in, because I mean, we have some fantastical concepts that are more science fiction, but this being a comic book, there is a fantasy feel to it, though. They also did some guest art for Exo Manowar, and he did the artwork for the first few issues of Archer and Armstrong as well. So I know that like Image Comics, was considered like the hot comic book company of the '90s, for a while, because I mean they always had the hot artists and everything. But I think with respect to Image Comics, Valiant Comics, was better in terms of, say, at least when Jim Shooter was on board, having a shared universe. And so when you had that crossover storyline called Unity, where Barry Windsor Smith did the beginning and ending chapter. I mean, and having seen his work on Solar Man of the Atom, I mean, it was really cool to see him taking part in a new universe, so to speak. And so, but the main thing that people tend to remember him for is for the Weapon X saga, which was a storyline that was originally in the anthology comic Marvel Comics Presents, and it was spread across several issues. But Barry Windsor Smith both wrote and illustrated it, and in that particular story, we finally got to see how Wolverine got his adamantium, got the adamantium bonded to his skeleton. And as far as Wolverine stories go, I mean, it's an essential one, but it's also a classic in terms of say, sheer, artistic vision. And it's something that even appeared in, or had elements of it that appeared in iterations outside of the comic book, such as, the first two X-Men movies, as well as the animated movie of Hulk versus Wolverine. So, and it turned up a bit in the X-Men animated series as well. So, it's definitely, a vital, part of Wolverine's story. And, I would say if you like, good comic books, even say if you're not a fan of the X-Men, but you just like good comic book storytelling, both in terms of writing and artwork, definitely check out Weapon X. So, okay, now that I've finished singing Barry Windsor Smith praises, I should probably give you all a little bit of a, catch up on, what's going on in the comic series proper, because the last review I did was for X-Men Annual number 10, wherein the character of Longshot joined the team. And that was a more, sort of fun and games, story. But here, though, we get back into the quote-unquote real world of the X-Men. So in the series proper, the X-Men were, hot off the heels of the Mutant Massacre storyline, which was arguably the darkest chapter in the X-Men saga at this point in time. And I would say it was even darker than the Dark Phoenix saga. So that should tell you something right there. But in the Mutant Massacre storyline, though, there was this group of mutants called the Morlocks that lived underground. And yes, they're named after the monstrous race that was in the H.G. Wells story, The Time Machine. But the Morlocks and the X-Men had sort of this, uneasy truce with one another, and they were led by a mutant named Callisto. But in this particular storyline of the Mutant Massacre, they were, almost wiped out by another group of mutants called the Marauders, which were a group of mutant mercenaries that had no qualms with killing fellow mutants. And so they were under orders from a then unknown master to literally just wipe out the Morlocks. And so only Callisto and a mere handful of Morlocks survived, thanks in part to the X-Men being able to rescue some of them, and Moira McTaggart and her medical team as well. But what ended up happening, though, aside from, along with the Morlocks almost being wiped out, was we had 3 X-Men ending up as casualties of the Marauders, and we had Colossus being injured so badly that he was stuck in his organic metal form. But when Magneto, who at this point in time is the headmaster of Xavier's school, and so he's the leader of both the X-Men and the New Mutants, and he's basically trying to redeem himself and show that Charles Xavier's faith in him wasn't misplaced. Magneto used his magnetic powers to try and repair Colossus, and he actually was able to, repair, the structural damage on him. But unfortunately, though, something went wrong, and Colossus was stuck. So he's basically paralyzed and stuck in his organic metal form. The other casualty was Nightcrawler, and he had been horrifically cut up repeatedly by a marauder named Riptide. And so he was cut up so badly that he was actually put into a coma. And to be fair, he probably would have been cut up regardless, but it wouldn't have been as bad if he had been 100%, because he was both physically and mentally not at his best at this particular point in time. And so what ended up happening was because he wasn't as strong as he thought he was, he ended up paying the price for it, and getting caught off guard, and then just torn up. And so he's in a coma. And Shadowcat, she ends up being stuck in her intangible form, to a point where she's breaking down on a cellular level, to a point where she's literally become a ghost, but it's only a matter of time before she disappears entirely. And so the best that the X-Men can do is, and Moira McTaggart's medical team can do, is to have her intangible form in this sort of energy storage pod, which doesn't stop the process of the breakdown, but at least slows it down. So anyway, we had 3 of our own X-Men ending up as casualties of the Marauders. And so we already knew that the Marauders were not going to be a walk in the park when they basically massacred the Morlocks. But now, with 3 of our own being taken out of the picture for a time, that's when we knew that the Marauders were a genuine threat. And another detail about them is that Thor had occasion to get involved in the storyline as well, and he actually ended up getting his arm broken by one of them. So yeah. But another major event in the storyline, and it didn't happen in the X-Men comics, but it is relating to the X-Men because it happened in the X Factor portion of the crossover, where the mutant Angel, aka Warren Worthington, had his wings mutilated by 2 of the Marauders, and basically he was hurt so badly that by the story's end, the medical staff at the hospital that he's taken to, they're telling the rest of X Factor that his wings are going to have to be amputated because they're so badly messed up that they've got gangrene. They're going to get gangrene. So yeah, fun stuff. But at this point in time, though, I should mention that X Factor consisted of the original 5 members of the X-Men. Cyclops, Jean Grey, Beast, Angel, and Iceman. So, but at this point in time, the X-Men, they don't know that Jean Grey is back among the living. So as far as they're concerned, she's still dead, and they don't know that these original 5 members of the X-Men are another team entirely. And so a lot of stuff going on, or a lot of stuff came out of the whole Mutant Massacre storyline. So but yeah, so when we get into this particular issue, we're seeing some fallout. And one of the other things that I should mention that happened was at the end of the Mutant Massacre storyline, the mutant Sabretooth, who at this point in time is one of the Marauders, basically, pulled a one-man army attack on the school, on Xavier's school, and took out Rogue, as it knocked her out, and almost killed Betsy Braddock, aka Psylocke, and he had basically ended up destroying Cerebro because he was under orders to take out anything that could basically lead the X-Men to being able to, say, spy on the Marauders, and namely Cerebro being able to locate mutants, and if you're a telepath, you can read that mutant's mind and what have you. So somehow the Marauders knew about Cerebro, and so Sabretooth came to destroy Cerebro and nearly killed Psylocke. But what ended up happening was Psylocke, she was able to outrun him and everything, and it was only when Wolverine came to fight him, because the two of them, it turns out, were old enemies, just based on some of the memories that Psylocke was able to finally read on Sabretooth, because when she was initially trying to read his mind before, his mental defenses were up. Whoever was his master gave him some formidable mental defenses, and so so initially Magneto and the others are wanting to try and capture Sabretooth, right then and there. But Psylocke points out, though, as does Storm, that with Sabretooth being occupied by Wolverine, his mental defenses will be lowered. So that gives Psylocke a chance to read his mind. And so she gets just enough information from him to know who the Marauders are, and not quite enough information to know who their master is, but they at least are able to put a name to, or a face to the name, so to speak. And at that point, once Sabretooth realized he'd been had, he bailed from the fight and dove off a cliff and into the water, and of course they couldn't find his body. So that's where we are at this point. Once we're back to the X-Men series proper. So starting from issue 214. Here we go. So it actually starts off at a concert for that Lila Cheney is having, and Lila Cheney is a mutant with the ability to teleport across other dimensions, if I remember correctly. But she's also a famous musician, and she's actually got another mutant in her band, namely Allison Blaire, aka Dazzler. And so Dazzler had some occasion to be involved with the X-Men back in the Dark Phoenix saga, but she had never joined them. But in her own series, she had occasion to come across them from time to time, but she was never a member. But something happened at the end of the series. I don't know what. I've never actually read the series. I just read about it here and there. But somehow at the end of her series, her career as a singer ends up being ruined. And I think a big part of it was because she's a mutant, and humanity just does not like mutants in general right now, and at this point in time in the story. And so she was a famous singer, and she used her light powers to add to the show. But because of, I guess, humankind's hatred for mutants in general, as well as whatever happened at the tail end of the Dazzler series, her career as a singer is over, and the public, they overall, they don't want her, and so, because she's a mutant. And so somewhere along the way, Lila Cheney had offered her a spot as a member of her band, namely as a keyboard player. And so Allison, she disguises herself, dyes her hair and what have you, and for a time, she's content to be a part of the band. But here's the thing, one of the other things that happened, it was a minor, seemingly minor, point in the Mutant Massacre story, but turns out that she had been, attacked, by a marauder named Malice. And so Malice was basically this corporate body hopping entity, that can jump from one person to another, and usually, Malice would just amplify whatever repressed traits, or whatever repressed negative traits that this host body would have, or this host would have, and in some cases, will even possess this person, and it all depends on what Malice's orders are. But for the time being, though, Malice is under orders to basically just mess with Dazzler, and just make her question herself and her own choices in life. And so, like, she starts appearing to Dazzler in her reflection, like a different version of herself, and so causing Dazzler to gradually get to where she's at a breaking point. And it's at this one particular concert, as the story opens up, when she sees herself, except she doesn't know it, but she's thinking that she's going crazy, right? But it's Malice, that sort of appears beside her, in her eyes, looking like her, and basically saying, you're better than this. I mean, you deserve so much more. Don't you remember the crowds, the adulation, and all this stuff? And so basically playing Dazzler like a fiddle, and to a point where Dazzler finally just says heck with it, and says screw this low profile BS, and uses her light powers right then and there during a live concert. And so naturally this kind of freaks the band out, and catches Lila Cheney off guard and pisses her off, because the whole reason that she offered Dazzler a spot on her band was so that she could keep a low profile and yet still be a part of the music scene, because she admired her as a fellow musician, and plus as a fellow mutant, and was wanted to help her out. But with her doing this crazy light show, the public now knows that Dazzler's with them now. And so she's like, what the heck were you what were you thinking? And so, of course, under Malice's influence, Dazzler just says, you know what, screw this, I'm going my own way, and so she leaves the band. And at that point, we cut to the Xavier School, and the X-Men there are trying to repair Cerebro, but unfortunately it's just trashed beyond repair, and unfortunately none of the ones that are there actually know how to fix it. And so for the time being, it's just some fascinating looking junk. And so, of course, I mean, they're still reeling from the trauma of the whole Mutant Massacre event, and Wolverine, I mean, is on edge, and he's trying to make sure that Psylocke is keeping up her guard. He's taking the role of harsh mentor, but of course, Psylocke, she's freaking out. She's like, are you crazy? I mean, I can kill you with my powers. And he's like, so why didn't you? And she's like, because you're my friend. You're one of us. What the hell's your problem? And he's saying that, if you could have killed me, why didn't you kill Sabretooth? And she's kind of flustered. She's like, that was a mistake. I don't know. And so basically, he's trying to make sure in his own intense way that she's going to be able to pull her own, because I mean, she's probably the newest member of the X-Men, and she got the spot because she was able to help them outwit Sabretooth and get information about the Marauders, and so so he's basically wanting to make sure that they didn't make a mistake in actually making her, one of them, as in one of the official X-Men. But in the meantime, though, they're sort of conversing about things, trying to see where everyone's at, and amongst other things, I mean, Wolverine and Callisto spar in the danger room together, and when Psylocke sees this, she's telling Storm, that, hey, they're trying to kill each other, and Storm's like, no, they're not. I fought them both. I know their measure, and they know what they're doing. But this is the only way that two warriors like them can really get it out of their system, and because they're both still traumatized from all the stuff that's happened, especially Callisto, because those were her people, and so once the two of them finished sparring, they get a call from Lila Cheney telling them about Dazzler. And she's saying, hey, I don't know what's going on with her, but you guys might want to check her out and see where she is and how she's doing, because something's not right. And so it's easy to find her because she's at this club venue, and she's playing the music, but she's also using her light powers like crazy. And apparently the light powers, one of the things that they can do is they can sort of manipulate someone's emotions. And so there's like a whole crowd of people there that's at once angry and awestruck at the same time. And it's getting to a point where the club owners called the police, and he's like, hey, I have no love for you guys, because I mean, y'all keep trying to bust my chops, but y'all got to do something here. And so the SWAT team's there, and then the media comes in because, hey, it's a mutant, right? But the X-Men are able to find her, and they make their way into the club. But unfortunately, though, that's when Malice just full on takes over Dazzler, and so she takes control, and has Dazzler use her light powers to full effect to fight the X-Men. And she's actually a pretty powerful individual, but to be fair, though, she's going up against a whole team, and so while she's able to put up a good fight against them, they are able to basically wear her down. But then Malice leaves Dazzler and then goes into Wolverine, and of course Wolverine, he does not react well at all to being mind controlled or manipulated, and so Wolverine just kind of goes into a feral state and starts lashing out at the X-Men, and so they're having to fight with him. But then Rogue ends up being the next victim of Malice, and so tapping into Rogue's frustration with her and the X-Men having to keep a low profile, so they don't draw the attention of humanity and the media in general. Malice pushes Rogue to basically just say screw it, and goes all out with her powers, in the sense of say flying around and destroying stuff in the club. And so then she ends up going outside and getting the attention of the SWAT team and the media, and saying hi, I'm Rogue and I'm with the X-Men, that's X-Men, remember that, and all this stuff. And so of course Rogue is a bit notorious at this point, because the government itself had tried to take Rogue out, which is how Storm ended up losing her powers, as I may have mentioned earlier. I don't remember if I did mention that, but anyway, though, Rogue, she's getting the media's attention, getting the authorities' attention, and so the X-Men are having to go contend with her as well. And this time Dazzler, who's come back to her senses, is able to, help them out and use her light powers to incapacitate Rogue. And so once that's happened, Malice, departs from Rogue and jumps into Storm, thinking that Storm's going to be, easy pickings because, she has no powers, right? But this is a mistake because, as readers of the series know by now, Storm has an exceptionally strong will, and she's been manipulated before and even possessed a few times, but even when she's fallen prey to such things, she's fighting every step of the way. And so whoever it is that's manipulated her or tried to possess her, they felt it, so it wasn't a walk in the park for them. And so the thing that ends up happening is anytime Malice possesses someone, this necklace materializes around her victim's, or its victim's, neck with this sort of ambiguous looking face on there. Like sometimes it's just a blank expression, sometimes it's a wicked grin, and so this necklace appears on Storm, and Malice is basically trying like hell to take control of Storm, thinking she's going to be easy pickings, but Storm is fighting through it, both on a mental level as well as on a physical level, because she is gradually able to get her hand to the necklace and then just rip it off. And because Malice was so focused on trying to take over Storm, Malice was completely caught off guard when Storm, ripped the necklace off and basically, destroyed Malice's link and any, ability to control Storm. And so Storm's, left a little drained by the experience, obviously, but she's triumphant. And so when, Wolverine sort of, comes back to his senses, he rejoins the group, but then, he smells Malice on. He's able to sort of detect Malice on Storm, because Malice having briefly taken him, he's got a feeling for Malice, and so he was able to tell that Malice had been inside Storm, and so initially he tries to attack Storm, but then he realizes that she's not there, and plus Storm and the other X-Men are like, hey dude, calm down, it's over. And so once Wolverine calms down, or he calms down as much as he can in the situation, because he's on edge for a lot of different reasons right now. So another thing that's been eating at Wolverine that he hasn't told the X-Men, including Storm, is that back during the Mutant Massacre, there was a point where he was underground in the Morlock tunnels, and he caught the scent of Jean Grey. And so, mind you, he and the X-Men, still think that Jean Grey is dead. They don't know that she's alive, and they don't know that she and the original X-Men are this other, team, So, he honestly thought that he was going crazy when it happened. But the whole experience with the Mutant Massacre has just, left him shaken up in general, hence his, overly intense, training with, Callisto and Psylocke and what have you. But having been, possessed by Malice, I mean, and with his history of, being brainwashed, I mean, he is even more on edge than he already is. And so, he accepts that, the danger's over for the moment, but, he's like looking over his shoulder the whole way and, eyeing everyone with suspicion. And so, with, the media catching all this and, the SWAT team on high alert, the X-Men decide to hightail it out of there and take Dazzler with them, because at this point, she herself even said, I've got nowhere to go at this point. I mean, I blew my ties with, Lila Cheney, and, obviously, someone's trying to kill me now, and just like they're trying to kill y'all, except at least y'all are a team and you've had some experience with whoever's trying to kill me. So yeah, I'm going with you guys. And it's not something that it's not something that she exactly wants to do, because I mean she likes having her own sense of agency and not having to rely on anyone, which is one of the things that, while she was grateful Lila Cheney for taking her in, she resented the fact that she was having to, basically play second fiddle in Lila Cheney's band and, sort of follow her, instructions and all that, except her as the leader. And so now, here she is having to go with another group, except a group of fellow mutants, that are on the run, or at least, trying to lay low, from the authorities and everything. And of course, with, Dazzler's, actions, I mean, albeit influenced by Malice, as well as with, Malice, causing havoc with Wolverine and Rogue, I mean, there's, even more media attention on the X-Men, now than there already was. And so the X-Men hightailed out of there, with Dazzler in hand, which is, how Dazzler ends up becoming a part of the team officially, now. And so, they're thinking that, okay, the Marauders, through Malice, did some PR damage to us, but at least, Malice paid the price for it, because they all heard, Malice's, psychic scream when Storm, ripped the necklace off. Unfortunately, though, it turns out that Malice isn't so easily, taken out. So Malice had basically, been able to, pull out at the very last second, but it still took a lot out of Malice in order to do so, because, Malice was so dead set on trying to take control of Storm that, when Storm ripped the necklace off, the psychic, or energy backlash or whatever, genuinely hurt Malice. But Malice went ahead and did its body hopping trick and ended up jumping into a member of the SWAT team. And so basically, acknowledging, that Storm and the X-Men were much stronger than, than they thought, the X-Men were going to be. But at the same time, they're satisfied that the damage has been done. So that's how that particular story ends. And I have to say, I mean, as a single issue, albeit one that's coming right off the heels of the Mutant Massacre, I thought, it did a good job of, sort of catching readers up on what's going on, as well as, showing, the full-on fallout from all that. I mean, we see, the psychological toll that it took, with the X-Men, as well as with Callisto, because, I mean, those were people that were slaughtered. And so, here she is having to, rely on, the X-Men, who have been both friend and foe to the Morlocks, mostly due to her own actions. But, here, I mean, she's, full on, a full-on ally at this point, but one that's, understandably, upset about things and about the position she's in, and of course the rest of the X-Men are still shaken by events, because I mean a lot of those Morlocks were people that they came to know, and so seeing all their friends slaughtered like that is just devastating to them. And then of course 3 of their own were badly injured as well, and so. And of course, I mean, they don't know about, Warren Worthington, because they don't know about X Factor at this point. But as far as they're concerned, 3 of their own have been badly hurt. And so I liked how, the creative team did a good job of catching, readers up on what was going on and seeing, showing us the psychological toll that it took. And Barry Windsor Smith, I thought, did a really good job of illustrating, that as far as, the whole feeling of the mood of the story. And like he's always been good at giving us imagery that is beautiful to look at, and yet violent and chaotic as well. And we get that in this particular story, what with Dazzler having her, break down, albeit one that's, brought on by Malice, and her light powers, going on full effect. Of course, I mean, with the X-Men, I mean, the way that he draws them, the way he draws their faces and everything, like when it comes to like the fighting and what have you, I mean, we know that they're still on edge from everything, and so now they're having to, corral someone that, they had occasion to work with, in the past, but they're trying to, do so for her own, not only her own well-being, but for theirs as well, because I mean, visibility as a mutant in the public is not an advisable thing right now, because the government's, looking for any excuse to lash out at mutants in general. But yeah, I mean, I thought that it was a good story that showed how, one person could do, irreversible, damage, to a whole team. And in this case, the person being Malice. Now, granted, Malice being a discorporate body hopping, mutant slash entity, I mean, definitely, makes it easier for them to do damage to the X-Men. But in real life, though, sometimes, I mean, you don't even have to, of course, you don't even have to have superpowers. I mean, you could just be, one person, saying something or doing something that deliberately, sets in motion like a domino effect, a chaos, and that's what we get here. And so, so the good news is, I mean, they have Dazzler on their team now, so they definitely have, a boost in, power capabilities and everything. But, Dazzler, though, is not exactly known for being a team player. And so, even, at the tail end of the story, she's kind of butting heads with them. But then, she reluctantly goes with them because she kind of owes them for saving her life. And so there's a sense of unpredictability, not only for the future and for mutants in general, but for the X-Men as well, because, they don't know how Dazzler is going to gel with the team and vice versa. So, but I really liked seeing how, like, I liked the depictions that we saw of Wolverine and Storm, because with Wolverine, I mean, as I mentioned, I mean, he does not react well to being manipulated or, mind controlled, because of his own past experiences. Now, obviously, this is all before the Weapon X saga ever came out, but we've already, from previous, stories, we've come to learn that Wolverine does not like being controlled or manipulated in any way, and he never reacts well to it. So we know something happened to him. And so we got that going on with him. And then, of course, the fact that, he's questioning his own sanity because of the fact that he picked up Jean Grey's scent, in the tunnels back in the Mutant Massacre storyline. And, he's still kind of shaken from that because he's thinking that he's starting to go crazy. And he's sort of overcompensating by, being an overly harsh mentor to, people like Psylocke, who's brand spanking new to the team, So we understand why, as readers, we understand why he's on edge, but at the same time, considering the fact that he's, a harsh good guy who has shown that he more often than not has a level head on his shoulders, albeit one that's, willing to, go into morally gray areas. I mean, it's interesting, seeing him as an almost ticking time bomb at times. Especially the bit where, after he's, started to come to his senses, but he still detects Malice on Storm at the very least, because he's able to pick up on the fact that Malice at least was, possessing Storm and nearly killed her, until, he stopped himself, and the rest of the X-Men stopped him too. So we see just how much of a ticking time bomb Wolverine is starting to become. And as far as Storm goes, I mean, we're reminded why, she's earned her spot as a team leader, because, she and Wolverine, work together, to, try and, rescue Dazzler. But of course, at this point, they were completely unaware that, Malice had possessed Dazzler. And so, of course, they're more than a little caught off guard when Dazzler, attacks him with all her might and everything. And then Malice starts, body hopping. But once they're able to, get it to where, Malice is all in on trying to possess Storm, we're reminded, of how powerful Storm is, not just with her abilities, her mutant abilities, but her psychological abilities, her psychological capabilities as well. And she's had more than one brush with being possessed or manipulated, and so we buy the fact that she was able to fight through it, and then just gradually rip the necklace off and cut Malice off at the source, or at least for a little bit. And we're definitely rooting for her every step of the way. So it was definitely another badass moment for Storm. And also liked her interaction with Psylocke when it came to, say, trying to reassure her, on things as far as how she handled it, herself, when Sabretooth was going after her and everything. And also, I liked her, dialogue with her when she's explaining that Wolverine and Callisto aren't trying to kill each other, but they're trying to blow off steam and frustration in the only way that they know how, because they're kind of going stir crazy, and they're so stressed out about not having any control over the whole situation with the Marauders. And so they're trying to decompress in the only way that two warriors like them can. And I thought that was a good moment, because Storm's had occasion to fight both Wolverine and Callisto, and for different reasons, mind you. But she is definitely able to be confident in how she explains the situation to Psylocke, because she's speaking from experience. And I liked seeing that, because it shows a sense of history. And of course, with Rogue, I liked, she's someone who usually doesn't keep quiet on things. Okay, like, she'll go by the rules, but she doesn't like it, and she lets the rest of the team know it too. And so to see her frustration be used against her in such a way to where she's able to be controlled by Malice, I mean, it's something that she's kind of kicking herself for after the fact, because she knows it wasn't her fault, but she also knows that that was something that was used, that was a part of her that was used against her. And so initially, like, she's butting heads with Dazzler because the two of them had occasion to fight each other in Dazzler's own series, but at the same time, though, even though she's not quite ready to accept Dazzler as a friend, I mean, she's willing to have Dazzler in the group, but they're not friends yet. But she, at the very least, has some sympathy for Dazzler for, the situation that she was in, as far as, having her life, taken away from her, as well as, being, vulnerable to forces outside of, her control. And Rogue definitely sympathizes with that. And Dazzler is actually starting to see that with Rogue too. So they're not friends yet, but they at least have a little bit of an understanding with each other. But it's going to be a bit before they get to a point where they're actually friends as well as teammates. So all in all, though, I thought that this was an excellent story, semi-standalone, in the sense that it was kind of a self-contained story, but it came about because of events, in the Mutant Massacre storyline. And we know that it's going to have a ripple effect in the issues to come. It's too ominous to not be so. So I'm going to go ahead and give issue 214 with Malice Toward All. I'm going to go ahead and give this one 5 out of 5 stars. this was a great issue, and Chris Claremont, I mean, continues to do an excellent job in writing the team and continuing to flesh out familiar characters, and as well as introducing us to semi new ones, or at the very least ones that have shown up before but aren't like regular members of the team. But like in the case of Dazzler, there's definitely a sense of familiarity because he's written her before in some prior X-Men stories, and of course with Barry and Windsor Smith doing the artwork. I mean, the story just looks fantastic, and in fact, since we have a little bit of time left, I'll go ahead and show it to y'all, or show y'all some of it. So here's the cover art. That's Storm fighting Dazzler there. And if you look carefully, right, I don't know how you can see it, but if you look right there, that's the necklace that manifests when Malice is possessing someone. And you can kind of see Malice's face. So yeah, the cover art is very accurate to something that happens within the actual issue. But like right off the bat though, I mean, just look at this here. Look at this. I mean, this is how it opens up with the concert. It's Lila Cheney right there. She's the front lady of the band. And there's Allison Blaire. That's Dazzler, but she's dyed her hair. She's in disguise. I mean, she's doing keyboards and stuff. But just look at the detail. And then we got right here, where as the concert goes on, Malice, starts to, make contact with Dazzler, your reflection. So, Malice, Dazzler, of course, I mean, she's, in the zone musically speaking, but she's also, taking stock of her life and not liking where she is. And, and then her, of course, that is kind of like a dinner bell to Malice, because Malice never left her, and so, we see Malice appearing as this, wild and free version of, Dazzler, saying, hey, just, do what you want to do, screw these people. There we go. And this is where we get psychedelic. Something else that Barry Windsor Smith was good at, like when it came to, sort of psychedelic looking artwork. I mean, tripping out almost, except with the lights. Dazzler giving in. And there's the necklace. There, Lila's like, what? And then, sure enough, boom. Cue the light show. The crowd loves it, but at the same time, you know that there's going to be a problem down the road with Lila Cheney's band, because the crowd didn't know that there was a mutant in the band. There they are arguing right there. And she's kind of like, Dazzler, WTF, right? And Dazzler's like, screw you guys, I'm going home. But yeah, just really good detail on the faces. Oh yeah, and like right there, I like the effect, like with the little streamers that she's sort of defiantly, shooting, out of her as she's walking away, saying kind of like a last middle finger to Lila Cheney. See, like right there. But yeah, when it came to like sort of acid trippy, looking, rays or globes or something like that, Barry Windsor Smith was pretty good. But also, okay, here's where we go into all out on the details and stuff. But Rogue and Psylocke and Storm trying to fix Cerebro, and yeah, it's all Cerebro is now is just a neat looking mess because they can't fix it. Rogue's flying off to patrol things. And here's where Callisto and Wolverine are trying to blow off steam. So, I mean, you think this would be a one-sided fight, but Callisto actually holds her own pretty well. See right there, Wolverine even gets a little cocky and then boom. So yeah, two hardcore warriors right there. And this is where he goes all harsh mentor on Psylocke. You know, she's just kind of, you know, casually, you know, coming up to him to, you know, ask him something, and then boom. That's when she, you know, lashes out with her mind powers. And she's like, you know, what the hell were you thinking? You know, I could have killed you. And that's when, you know, he's all like, well, why didn't you? But once again, I mean, very good artwork on the faces. Because, I mean, you can tell that, you know, Wolverine has kind of been worn down by all this, but he's on edge. And here's the club where they find Dazzler. She's going all out with the light show. Once again, we get all psychedelic right there. Here we go. Cue the fight. Yeah, just like really, really good artwork. And oh, here we go. Okay, so there's a little detail I liked that Barry Windsor Smith put in. Anytime Malice jumps from one person to another, you know, the figure of Malice changes. So see right there, you know, Malice looks feminine, you know, because Malice is leaving Dazzler. But when Malice heads towards Wolverine, you know, the form looks more masculine because it's, you know, Wolverine. And boom. Love that look on Wolverine's face. And of course, this is where, you know, Rogue got taken over. And Dazzler's come back to her senses, and so they're trying to touch base. And Storm just, you know, regardless of who's drawing her, I mean, Storm just looks badass with a mohawk, but I think Barry Windsor Smith really sells it, though, with the detail. And Rogue just looks batshit crazy right there. I love it. And of course, she's under Malice's control at that point. And there she is, you know, spilling her guts to the media. Here. You know, with the combination of teamwork, you know, with Psylocke and Dazzler working against her, they're able to, you know, wear Rogue down enough to where Malice decides to go ahead and take a shot at possessing Storm. So here's her form. And here we go, the Battle of Wills. Boom. Awesome stuff. And here, Dazzler decides to go with them, reluctantly so, mind you. Okay. Mind you, this was before the Weapon X series, but this just shows how awesome Barry Windsor Smith was at drawing Wolverine, especially when he's going all berserker. And they're like, dude, back off. You know, she's okay. She's not possessed anymore. But yeah. So there you go. Yeah, that was with Malice Toward All, X-Men issue number 214. So yeah, that was 5 out of 5 stars, and it was a great little story, and definitely set the deck for things to come. So thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. And if you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. And if you got any questions, comments, or have any constructive feedback, I'd love to hear it. But y'all take care. Have a good night. Bye.